Part 1, The Hook. Before there was a king, there was a lost cub. Let me ask you something. What if everything you thought you knew about the greatest lion who ever lived was only half the story? What if the majestic, golden-maned king whose death shattered an entire generation of Disney fans, the lion whose shadow stretched across one of the most beloved animated films in history, what if that lion didn't start out as royalty at all? What if Mufasa, the Mufasa, was once just a scared, hungry, nameless cub standing at the edge of a flooding river, with nothing to his name and nowhere to go? That's where this story begins. Not on Pride Rock. Not with a royal birth and a ceremonial sunrise. Not with Rafiki holding a lion cub up to the heavens while the entire African savannah bows in reverence. No. This story begins in the mud. In the cold. In the dark. With a cub who has already lost everything, his family, his home, his sense of identity, and who has no idea that one day, the whole world will remember his name. Welcome back, everybody. You're watching, and today we are doing a full deep dive breakdown of Mufasa, the Lion King, the 2024 prequel to one of Disney's most iconic properties in cinematic history. We're talking story breakdown, scene by scene, character analysis, thematic deep dives, performance breakdowns, cinematography, music, the works. This one is going long because this movie demands it. There is so much happening beneath the surface of this film that a standard 10-minute review would be doing it a genuine disservice. So get comfortable. Pour yourself something warm. Because we are about to go all the way in. And I promise you, by the time we are done here today, you will see this movie completely differently than you did walking out of the theater. Let's get into it. Part 2, Movie Overview. What is this film, who made it, and why does it matter? Mufasa, The Lion King was released on December 20, 2024, strategically dropped right into the heart of the holiday season, positioned as Disney's big prestige animated event film of the year. It's directed by Barry Jenkins, and if that name makes you stop and go wait, that Barry Jenkins? Yes. That Barry Jenkins. The man who gave us Moonlight, one of the most emotionally devastating and visually stunning films of the 21st century. The man behind If Beale Street Could Talk. An Academy Award-winning director known for his deeply intimate character work, his extraordinary sensitivity to black identity and emotional vulnerability, and his almost painterly approach to cinematography. The fact that Disney handed this particular director the reins of a Lion King prequel is, frankly, one of the most interesting creative decisions the studio has made in a long time. And the results, as we're going to break down today, are far more complex and emotionally layered than the marketing campaign ever really let on. The film features an extraordinary voice cast. Aaron Pierre voices the young Mufasa, and let me tell you right now, his performance is one of the most pleasant surprises in any Disney film in recent memory. Kelvin Harrison Jr. voices the young Taka, who you will come to know by a different name before the end of the film. Seth Rogen and Billy Eichner return as Pumbaa and Timon, because of course they do, and thank God for that. John Kani voices the old Rafiki. Beyonce Knowles Carter returns as Nala, and her daughter Blue Ivy Carter makes her film debut voicing young Kiara. Donald Glover returns as the adult Simba. And critically, Mads Mikkelsen voices the film's primary antagonist, a massive, white-maned lion named Kiros. And look, Mads Mikkelsen voicing a terrifying villain in a major studio film is basically a cinematic law of nature at this point. The film is a prequel within a sequel. Here's what I mean by that structural choice, and it's a really important one to understand before we dive into the story. The framing device of Mufasa takes place after the events of the 2019 Lion King remake. So we're following adult Simba, adult Nala, young Kiara, and Timon and Pumbaa in the present day. The main story, Mufasa's origin, is being narrated to young Kiara by Rafiki during a storm. So this is structurally a story within a story, which gives it a mythological, almost oral tradition quality. It's the kind of storytelling that says, this isn't just a movie. This is a legend being passed down. Genre-wise, this is a fantasy epic with strong coming-of-age and tragic drama elements. It's Disney, so yes, There's gorgeous animation and sweeping musical numbers. But under Barry Jenkins's direction, it carries genuine emotional weight that pushes it well beyond the typical Disney animated feature template. Audience expectations at release were complicated. Let's be honest about that. The 2019 photorealistic Lion King remake was a massive box office hit. It grossed over $1.6 billion worldwide, but it was also critically divisive. A lot of people felt it was a technically impressive but emotionally hollow replica of the 1994 original. The photorealistic aesthetic, while stunning, drains some of the expressive warmth from the characters. So going into Mufasa, there was a real question: is this another cash grab? Is Disney just mining nostalgia again? Or is there something genuinely new here worth caring about? The answer, as we are about to discover, is considerably more nuanced than either the skeptics or the cheerleaders predicted. Now, let's get into the story. Because that's what you're really here for. Part 3: the full story breakdown, scene by scene, beat by beat. The framing story: Pride Rock, the present day. The film opens not in the past, but in the now, or at least, the now of this cinematic universe, which is to say the world after Simba has reclaimed Pride Rock from Scar and established his reign. We're introduced almost immediately to young Kiara, Simba and Nala's daughter, voiced by Blue Ivy Carter, and right off the bat, I want to acknowledge something. Blue Ivy Carter at 11 years old gives a performance that is genuinely charming and age-appropriate in the best possible way. There's no sense of strain or artificiality in her delivery. She sounds like a real kid, which is exactly what this character needs to be. A storm rolls in across the savannah, one of those vast, dramatic African storms that turns the world dark and golden all at once, and young Kiara ends up taking shelter with Rafiki and Timon and Pumbaa. And it's in this moment of refuge and storytelling that the real movie begins. Kiara asks a simple question. The kind of question children ask when they're just beginning to understand the world beyond themselves. She wants to know about Mufasa. Who was he, really? Where did he come from? Was he always a king? And Rafiki, wise, ancient, carrying generations of memory in his eyes, begins to tell the story. The framing device is beautifully executed. It gives the film a sense of legend, of myth-making, of oral tradition that feels culturally resonant in a way that honors the African storytelling traditions that have always been at the heart of the Lion King's DNA. Stories told by firelight. Stories told during storms. Stories that are meant to be passed down not just as history but as instruction, as a guide for how to live. And so, we go back. Act 1, The Flood and the Finding. The earliest sequence of young Mufasa's life that we witness is already one of loss. We see a small pride of lions, Mufasa's biological family, living near a river. Life is good, if modest. Mufasa's parents are loving, present, warm. We get just enough time with this family to understand what they mean to Mufasa, to feel the safety and warmth of their world, and then the film rips it away. A catastrophic flood hits. And this sequence, I want you to pay attention to this, is Barry Jenkins doing what Barry Jenkins does. The camera doesn't cut away from the horror of it. The flood is chaotic, terrifying, disorienting in the way real disasters are. Mufasa is swept down river, tumbling through churning black water, completely helpless. He's a cub. He has no power here. And when the water finally releases him onto a muddy bank, gasping and shaking and alone, his family is gone. Just like that. The film doesn't linger on a prolonged, melodramatic goodbye. There's no body to grieve over, no clear moment of death to process. Mufasa's family is simply gone. Taken by the water. And that ambiguity is actually more devastating than a clean death scene would be, because Mufasa, and by extension, the audience, is left with that terrible, echoing uncertainty. Did they survive somewhere? Did they look for him? He'll never know. This is the psychological wound that the entire film is built around. Mufasa is a lion who, from the very beginning of his conscious life, has had to grapple with the question of belonging, of whether he deserves to be somewhere. Of whether he is wanted. Now, cold and alone and starving, the young cub wanders until he stumbles into the territory of a neighboring pride. And this is where he meets the character who will change his life forever. The introduction of Taka, and the question of destiny. A young lion Mufasa encounters first isn't exactly welcoming. But he's not cruel either. He's something more interesting than either of those things. Taka, voiced with extraordinary emotional intelligence by Kelvin Harrison Jr., is a prince, the son of the ruling king of this pride. He is, by birth and bloodline, everything Mufasa is not. He has a home. He has a family. He has a future that is already written for him. But here's the fascinating thing about Taka as a character, and this is where the film starts doing genuinely sophisticated psychological work. Taka doesn't want the destiny that was written for him. He doesn't want the throne. He doesn't want the weight of leadership. He's anxious, slightly neurotic, deeply sensitive, not the profile of a conventional lion king. And he knows this about himself. He's been told this about himself. And that knowledge has curdled inside him into something that hasn't turned toxic yet, but is dangerously close. When Taka meets Mufasa, this bedraggled, starving, homeless cub, his first instinct isn't hostility. It's almost recognition. Here is someone who has nothing. No title. No expectation. No predetermined role. And instead of pitying Mufasa, Taka is almost envious of him. This dynamic, the prince who doesn't want to be a prince, befriending the pauper who doesn't know he's destined to become a king, is the emotional engine of the entire film. It's a friendship story. A brotherhood story. And eventually, a tragedy. Their early scenes together crackle with a genuine warmth and chemistry that is one of the film's greatest achievements. These two characters are immediately compelling together. Taka is witty, a little self-deprecating, surprisingly vulnerable. Mufasa is earnest, determined, grateful in a way that reads as dignity rather than subservience. They complete each other in the way that the best fictional friendships do, each one's strength filling in the other's weakness. Taka sneaks Mufasa food. Hides him. Starts teaching him the ways of the pride. And slowly, carefully, a bond forms. The king, Abasi, and the world of the pride. Taka's father, the king of this pride, is a character of enormous presence and tragic importance. He is not a villain. That's crucial to understand. He is a lion who loves his son genuinely, who carries the weight of leadership with apparent grace, but who has also absorbed a set of beliefs about bloodlines and destiny and royal inheritance that will ultimately contribute to everything going wrong. He discovers Mufasa living among his pride, this outsider, this nobody, and his reaction is layered. He doesn't immediately expel Mufasa with cruelty. But he makes clear that there is an order to things. That his pride has traditions. That his son Taka has a destiny to fulfill, and a stray cub with no bloodline, no lineage, no royal heritage has no place in that future. The tension between Mufasa's innate qualities, his bravery, his instinct to protect others, his natural magnetism, and his complete lack of social standing within this pride's hierarchy is one of the film's richest thematic veins. Because what the film is arguing, subtly and persistently, is that royalty is not in the blood. It is in the character. It is in the choices you make when everything is on the line. Mufasa doesn't know this yet. He's just trying to survive. But the audience can see it. We are watching the origin story of a legend, and the legend is forming not through birthright, but through repeated acts of courage, kindness, and selflessness that nobody asked him to perform. The arrival of Kiros, the white mane of death. And then the film introduces its antagonist. Kiros, voiced by Mads Mikkelsen, is described in the film as an outsider lion of extraordinary size and power, with a distinctive white mane that makes him look like a ghost, a winter storm, something that doesn't belong in the warm golden world of the savannah. He leads a group of lions called the Outsiders, nomadic hunters who have developed a philosophy, almost a religion, centered on dominance. On taking what you want. On the belief that power is the only truth. Kiros is the kind of villain who doesn't think of himself as a villain, which, of course, makes him exponentially more dangerous than one who does. He has a genuine worldview. A consistent, internally logical framework for why his way of life is correct. The strong take. The weak are taken from. That's just the order of the world. As far as Kiros is concerned. Sentimentality is a weakness. Belonging is an illusion. There is no home worth defending because nothing is truly yours until you take it by force. Mads Mikkelsen does something really special with this role. His voice carries a quietness that is more unsettling than any amount of theatrical bellowing. Kiros doesn't roar to intimidate. He speaks softly. Precisely. Like a predator who knows he doesn't need to announce himself because the danger he represents is already obvious to everyone in the room. When Kiros and his outsiders arrive at the Pride's territory, it's not just a physical threat. It's an ideological one. He represents everything that Mufasa, at his deepest level, is working against, whether he knows it or not. Kiros's philosophy is that belonging is a lie. Mufasa's entire existence is a testament to the opposite, that belonging can be earned, that love can be chosen, that family can be built from nothing. The Promised Land, Malele. This is where the film introduces one of its most beautiful and mythologically resonant elements, the concept of Malele. In the world of this film, Malele is a legendary place, a paradise described in whispered stories among lions across the savannah. A land of endless green, flowing rivers, abundant prey, where no lion goes hungry and every creature lives without fear. It's Eden. It's Zion. It's the Promised Land. For Mufasa, who has lost everything and belongs nowhere, the idea of Malele becomes more than just a destination. It becomes a dream. Something to move toward. A reason to keep going when everything keeps telling him to stop. The film is smart enough to handle Malele with real thematic sophistication. Malele is not just a place. It's a metaphor for what Mufasa is really searching for, a home. A sense of permanence. The feeling of being somewhere that is truly yours. The quest to find Malele becomes the journey that bonds Mufasa and Taka, and eventually a small group of other characters, into a found family. They're not traveling just for adventure. They're traveling because each of them, in their own way, is looking for a place where they belong. The fellowship forms, Sarabi and the others. As the journey begins, the film expands its central cast. Sarabi, the lion who will eventually become Mufasa's queen and Simba's mother, enters the story as a young lioness with a fierce, independent spirit and a mind of her own. Her voice performance captures a character who is not simply a love interest but a fully realized individual with her own agency, her own courage, and her own complex feelings about the strange, homeless lion who has somehow wandered into her life. The love story between Mufasa and Sarabi is handled with real delicacy. There's no sudden thunderbolt of romantic declaration. Their connection builds slowly, through shared danger and shared laughter and the kind of quiet moments where two people realize, without entirely meaning to, that they feel safer around each other than anywhere else. It's one of the film's most genuinely moving threads. There's also a devastating complication here that the film handles with impressive courage. Taka is also in love with Sarabi. And this triangle, which is never treated as a cheap melodramatic plot device but rather as a genuinely painful emotional reality, is what drives the film's most heartbreaking character development. Taka watches his best friend, the lion he loves like a brother, fall for the lioness that Taka himself has feelings for. And he watches Sarabi choose Mufasa. Not because Mufasa is richer or stronger or more powerful, he has literally nothing at this point. But because of who Mufasa is. Because of his character. And for Taka, who already struggles with feelings of inadequacy, who has always been told, explicitly or implicitly, that he is less than what a king should be, this rejection becomes the crack in the dam. The beginning of the end. Act 2, The Journey and the Tests. The middle section of the film follows Mufasa, Taka, Sarabi, and their companions on their journey toward Malele, while Kiros and the outsiders pursue them. And this is where Barry Jenkins' directorial sensibility really comes into its own, because this isn't a standard action-adventure middle-act. Yes, there are action sequences. There are moments of real danger and excitement. But Jenkins keeps insisting on the emotional truth beneath every chase, every confrontation, every narrow escape. There's a sequence, and I want to be specific here because it's one of the film's most quietly powerful scenes, where Mufasa and Taka are alone, resting after a close encounter with Kiros' hunters. And Taka asks Mufasa something honest and raw: "Why are you always so sure? Why do you always seem to know what to do? What is it in you that makes you like this?" And Mufasa's answer is crucial to understanding his character. He tells Taka that he's not sure. That he's terrified, constantly. That the reason he runs toward danger instead of away from it is not because he isn't afraid, it's because he's already learned what it feels like to lose everything, and that fear is less acute than the fear of doing nothing while someone he loves gets hurt. This is the psychological bedrock of Mufasa as a character. His bravery isn't the absence of fear. It's a choice he makes in spite of fear, informed by grief. He knows the cost of passivity. He learned it in a flood. He learned it when his family disappeared into dark water. And Taka, hearing this, genuinely hearing it, maybe for the first time understanding that his friend's strength comes from wound rather than from some innate superior quality, is deeply, visibly moved. And also, quietly, more devastated. Because Taka's wound is not lost. It's inadequacy. It's the feeling of never being enough. And he's beginning to understand that his wound will never heal the same way Mufasa's will. The tests of character, courage in the field. Several action sequences throughout the second act serve a clear thematic purpose. Each one is designed to reveal character under pressure. In one memorable sequence, the group encounters a situation where the obvious move would be to run, to save themselves and abandon others. Every sensible voice says run. And Mufasa doesn't run. He turns around. He goes back. He puts himself between danger and others who cannot protect themselves. It's not complicated. But it's profound, because the film is showing us, slowly, scene by scene, brick by brick, how a legend is constructed. Not in one grand heroic moment. In 100 small choices. 100 moments where you could have looked away, and you didn't. Meanwhile, Taka is being tested in a different way. His tests are internal. Every moment of Mufasa's heroism is also, and the film is incredibly honest about this, a moment that makes Taka feel smaller by contrast. Not because Mufasa is trying to diminish him. But because Taka's relationship with his own self-worth is so fragile, so conditional, that Mufasa's natural excellence reads as a kind of constant, unintentional rebuke. There's a psychological term for this dynamic, it's called upward social comparison, and it's one of the most common and painful experiences in the human psychology. Standing next to someone who embodies the things you wish you were is a particular kind of suffering. And the film captures it with uncommon accuracy. Kiros eventually catches up with them. And in their first real confrontation, not a full battle, but a tense, dangerous face-to-face encounter, Kiros says something to Mufasa that is quietly devastating in retrospect. He tells Mufasa that he recognizes him. Not literally, they've never met. But spiritually. Ideologically. He tells Mufasa that he is an outsider. Just like Kiros. That the difference between them is only one of honesty. Kiros admits that he takes what he wants, while Mufasa pretends that he's something more noble. It's the film's most explicitly philosophical moment, and it's where Kiros becomes genuinely interesting as a villain rather than just a threat. Because what he's saying has a grain of terrible truth in it. Mufasa is an outsider. He did wander into another lion's pride and, in a sense, take what he found there, a family, a home, a future. The difference, and it's everything, is how and why and with what spirit. Mufasa doesn't take. He receives what is freely given. And he gives back more than he takes. That's the distinction. But Kiros is correct that the categories of outsider and insider are not as clean as the world likes to pretend. The discovery of Malele, and what it costs. Eventually, the group finds it. Malele. And the sequence where they first lay eyes on this legendary place is, genuinely, without exaggeration, one of the most visually stunning scenes in recent Disney animation. The animation team, working under Jenkins's direction, creates something that feels less like a Disney movie and more like a painting by an African master brought to life. Lush greens, impossibly clear water, a sky that looks like it was designed specifically to remind you that the world is beautiful and worth protecting. For Mufasa, standing at the edge of Malele, There is a moment of almost transcendent peace. He found it. The place that exists. The place that is real. The home that is possible. But here is where the film makes its boldest narrative choice, and I want to walk through it carefully because it's where everything starts to fall apart in the most heartbreaking and inevitable way. Kiros finds Malele too. Of course he does. Of course he does. The paradise you find is only yours until someone who wants it more, or is willing to be crueler to keep it, shows up. This is one of the film's darkest and most honest observations about the world. Utopia is always precarious. The promised land always has to be defended. Peace is not a natural state, it is a constant active effort, and it requires a willingness to stand between the dream and the darkness. Act 3: The Fracture, the tragedy of Taka. This is the heart of the film. This is where Barry Jenkins earns every comparison to his other work, because what happens here is genuinely tragic in the classical sense of the word. It arises entirely from character, from the internal logic of who these lions are, rather than from arbitrary external plotting. Kiros doesn't just want Malele. He wants to reshape the world in his image. He approaches Taka. And here is the moment the film has been building toward for its entire runtime. Kiros tells Taka the truth, or at least, a truth. He tells Taka what Taka has always secretly known, that Mufasa will always be the one who gets the glory. Always the one who is loved more, chosen more, celebrated more. Taka's own father preferred Mufasa's character to his blood-born son S. Sarabi chose Mufasa despite Taka's feelings. The pride that Taka was born into looks to Mufasa for leadership despite Taka's claim to inheritance. And Kiros offers Taka something irresistible, the chance to finally win. To finally be the one who is chosen. To finally have the world see him as more than the second best lion in the room. What Kiros is offering, stripped of its surface details, is validation. The promise that Taka is enough. That he is, in fact, more than enough. He is destined to be powerful, to be feared, to be remembered. And Taka, this sensitive, wounded, increasingly desperate lion, listens. I want to be very careful here about how I describe what happens next, because the film is similarly careful. Taka doesn't become a monster overnight. He doesn't have a sudden villain turn where he cackles and announces his treachery. What happens to Taka is a gradual corrosion. A series of small compromises, each one justified by the pain of the last rejection, each one pulling him a little further from the lion he was and a little closer to something neither he nor Mufasa can come back from. He provides Kiros with information. He helps create a situation that puts Mufasa at a disadvantage. And then, in a confrontation that goes wrong in ways Taka did not anticipate or intend, he makes a choice that cannot be unmade. The scar? Without giving away every specific beat, the film arrives at its most cinematically powerful sequence through a confrontation between Mufasa, Taka, Kiros, and the full weight of everything that has been building. Mufasa is wounded. Severely. There is a moment, a genuine, sustained moment, where you do not know if he will survive. And given the mythology surrounding this character, that uncertainty is doing something really sophisticated. It's reminding you that the legend of Mufasa was never guaranteed. He could have died here, in this valley, before any of the things that made him legendary ever happened. The king is not inevitable. He has to choose to survive. And Taka, in the chaos and the violence and the horror of watching what his choices have created, receives a wound of his own, a scar across his eye. And in that moment, watching the blood and the grief and the recognition of what he has done, Taka makes one final choice. He takes a new name. He walks away from the lion he was. He becomes Scar. This is the film's most emotionally devastating beat, and it lands with the force it does because of how long and how carefully the film has been developing Taka as a full, complex, sympathetic character. He is not Scar because he was born evil. He is Scar because he was in pain, and the wrong lion found him in the right moment of weakness. He is Scar because he loved his friend and lost him, not to death, but to something more painful. To the realization that his own choices made him someone his friend could no longer love or trust. This is Greek tragedy. This is Shakespearean. This is The Lion King earning its literary pretensions in a way the 2019 remake never came close to. The aftermath, Mufasa becomes king. In the wake of the confrontation with Kiros and the departure of Taka, Mufasa's journey toward kingship is handled with appropriate gravity. He doesn't want a throne. He never did. What he wanted was a home. What he got was a responsibility. The pride that rallies around him is not rallying around a bloodline or a birthright. They're rallying around a set of choices they witnessed with their own eyes. Mufasa is king not because anyone decided he should be, but because when everything went dark, he was the one who kept trying to find the light. And Sarabi is beside him. Not as a prize, not as a trophy, but as an equal partner. The film gives their relationship a real sense of mutual respect and chosen commitment that reads as genuinely romantic rather than just conventionally fairy tale. The establishment of Pride Rock and what becomes the great kingdom that Simba inherits, we see the seeds of it here. The circle of life. The philosophy of stewardship rather than domination. The belief that a king's power is in service to his pride, not above it. And watching it all come together, knowing what it will eventually lead to, knowing what Taka/Scar will eventually do to all of this, is genuinely heartbreaking in a way that only origin stories can manage. Back to the present Kiara and the meaning of the story. The film returns to its framing device, Rafiki, Timon, Pumbaa, and young Kiara in the shelter of the storm. And the story Rafiki has been telling now lands with its full weight. Kiara is not just learning about her grandfather. She is learning something about herself. About the world she lives in. About why the past matters to the present, and why understanding where you come from helps you understand who you are. There's a beautiful, quiet moment where Kiara asks Rafiki what happened to Taka. And Rafiki, who has lived through all of this, who carries it in his bones, pauses. And says what I think is the most honest line in the film, that Taka became someone else. And that the tragedy of it is not what he did, but what he could have been. This lands differently if you've seen the original Lion King. Scar is not a new character to anyone watching Mufasa. We know what he became. We know what he did to his own brother. We watched him kill Mufasa and blame Simba and let the pride lands wither into dust. But now we know what was lost when Taka walked away. Not just a good lion. A friendship that could have been something extraordinary. A brotherhood that, under different circumstances, could have strengthened rather than destroyed everything. The tragedy of Scar, properly understood, is not what he did to Mufasa. It's what he did to himself. Part 4, Character and Performance Analysis. Aaron Pierre as young Mufasa. Let me be direct, Aaron Pierre's vocal performance as young Mufasa is a revelation. He has a natural warmth and earnestness that never tips into saccharine. His voice has texture, you can hear the emotion in it without it ever feeling performed or manufactured. When Mufasa is afraid, you hear it. When he's determined, you hear that too. And crucially, when Mufasa is in pain, particularly in the scenes involving Taka's betrayal, Pierre finds a register of grief that is quiet and devastating. There's a particular scene where Mufasa speaks about what it felt like to be swept away in the flood, and Pierre delivers it with such raw simplicity that it bypasses your critical thinking entirely and goes straight to the gut. That's the mark of exceptional voice acting, when you forget that you're listening to an actor and start responding to the character as if they're real. Pierre also manages the challenge of playing a character we know becomes a legend, without ever letting that knowledge infect the performance with false portent. His Mufasa doesn't know he'll be a king. And Pierre plays every scene accordingly, not as a future king in disguise, but as a young lion figuring it out moment by moment. That is genuinely difficult, and Pierre does it beautifully. Kelvin Harrison Jr. as Taka/Scar. Kelvin Harrison Jr. may give the film's most technically accomplished performance, and I say that with tremendous respect for the rest of the cast. Playing a character who will eventually become one of Disney's most iconic villains, while making him sympathetic, genuinely, painfully sympathetic, without ever softening the reality of his moral failures, is an almost impossibly difficult needle to thread. Harrison does it. His Taka is not villainous until he is. And the progression is so gradual, so psychologically precise, that you almost don't notice it happening until it has already happened, which is exactly how it works in real life when people we love change in ways we don't want to acknowledge. What Harrison gets absolutely right is Taka's relationship with his own pain. He never plays the character as self-aware about his descent. Taka genuinely believes at every stage, that he is justified. That he is responding reasonably to an unreasonable situation. That the world owes him something and he is simply trying to collect. The tragedy, and the horror, is how familiar that psychology is to anyone who has ever watched someone they care about let resentment curdle into something destructive. Mads Mikkelsen as Kiros. Kiros could easily have been a thin, one-note movie villain. A big bad whose only function is to threaten the heroes and get defeated at the end. The fact that he isn't, the fact that he registers as genuinely ideologically menacing, is entirely the product of what Mads Mikkelsen does with his voice. Mikkelsen plays Kiros with the specificity of a character actor playing a minor Shakespeare villain, which is to say, he finds real psychology in what could have been a stock figure. Kiros has reasons. He has a worldview. He has lived a life that led him to become what he is, and while the film doesn't have time to fully excavate that backstory, Mikkelsen's performance implies it. You feel the history behind every line he delivers. His best scene is the confrontation with Taka, where he offers Taka the poison disguised as medicine, because he plays it not as a conventional villainous seduction but as something almost gentle. He's not cackling. He's not threatening. He's comforting a wounded animal. He's speaking to Taka's pain with real attention and real understanding. And that is what makes him genuinely dangerous. Not his claws. His empathy. His terrible, weaponized empathy. Sarabi and the supporting cast. The supporting cast across the board delivers strong work, with particular credit due to whoever cast and directed Sarabi. She is not treated as a peripheral character or a romantic reward. She has her own complete arc, she makes choices, takes risks, demonstrates values that are entirely her own. The film is careful to establish her as someone who would have been extraordinary regardless of who she ended up beside. Timon and Pumbaa, brought back by Seth Rogen and Billy Eichner with obvious relish, serve a structural function as comic relief during the framing story, but they do it with enough genuine heart that you never resent their presence. And there are a few moments where Pumbaa in particular shows a quiet emotional depth that catches you genuinely off guard. Part 5, Themes, Symbolism, and Subtext. The question of belonging. If Mufasa has a single animating theme, one idea that every other element of the film is in service to, it is belonging. Where do we come from? Where do we belong? And crucially, is belonging something you are born into, or something you build? The film comes down clearly on one side of this question, and it does so without being didactic or preachy. Every element of Mufasa's journey argues that belonging is chosen. It is made from love and loyalty and the willingness to show up for others. It is not determined by bloodline or birth or geographical accident. This is, of course, a theme with obvious resonance for anyone who has ever felt like an outsider. For anyone who has ever wondered whether they deserve the love and community they've found. For anyone who has ever looked at the world's hierarchies and questioned the logic that says you are less valuable because of where or how you were born. Barry Jenkins, a black filmmaker working in America, who has spent his entire career exploring questions of identity, community, belonging, and the violence done to people who fall outside the dominant culture's definition of who matters, was not, I would argue, an accidental choice for this film. His sensibility is all over the thematic architecture of Mufasa, and it gives the film a depth and resonance that goes well beyond typical franchise storytelling. The myth of meritocracy, and its complications. The film is also quietly wrestling with something more complicated, the myth of meritocracy. Mufasa rises to become king because of his character and his choices, but the film is honest enough to acknowledge that he was also fortunate. He was found at the right moment. He was taken in. He was given a chance that many other lost cubs never get. His path to Malele required Taka's hospitality at the beginning. His survival required the loyalty of those who chose to travel with him. What the film is saying, subtly, carefully, is that individual character matters and that the community and circumstances around you matter equally. Mufasa is extraordinary. And he was also lucky. And the tragedy of Taka is in part the tragedy of someone whose luck ran differently. Who found the wrong mentor. Who hit his worst moment of vulnerability at the moment when the wrong voice was closest. This is not a simple meritocracy fable. It's something messier and more honest than that. Found family and chosen bonds. The fellowship that forms around Mufasa during the journey to Malele is a textbook example of found family, one of the most enduring narrative archetypes in storytelling. These are characters who did not choose each other by birth or circumstance. They chose each other. And their bond is stronger for the choosing. The film holds up this chosen family as the truest form of kinship. Not blood. Not inheritance. Choice. And then it tests that idea brutally, because Taka is also part of this found family, and he's the one who breaks it. Which makes the film's exploration of found family more honest than most. Chosen bonds can be broken too. Belonging that is built can be destroyed. The family you chose can still hurt you, still leave you, still become something unrecognizable. The circle of life is not just a metaphor for nature. It's a metaphor for grief. Things grow, and they die, and they feed what comes next. The love between Mufasa and Taka nourishes, in its destruction, the depth of understanding that eventually shapes Simba's journey. The circle holds light and darkness, the visual symbolism. Barry Jenkins and his cinematographic collaborators make extraordinarily consistent use of light throughout the film. Mufasa is almost always filmed in warmth, gold, amber, the deep orange of the African sunset. His scenes have natural light even when they're emotionally difficult. Kiros, by contrast, is filmed in cold, harsh white. The white of his mane, the bleached-out quality of the landscapes where he appears. He is winter in a world built on summer. He is the absence of warmth. Taka's visual trajectory is one of the film's most elegant storytelling choices. At the beginning, he is bathed in the same warm light as Mufasa. Gradually, almost imperceptibly at first, then increasingly obviously, his lighting shifts. Shadows come to live on his face in ways they don't on others. By the film's final act, he has migrated visually toward Kiros's cold palette. This is the kind of filmmaking that rewards attentive viewers enormously. It tells you what's happening to Taka's soul before the script makes it explicit. Storms and water. Water appears repeatedly throughout the film, always loaded with meaning. The flood that destroys Mufasa's first family. The river they must cross during the journey to Malele. The rain that frames the film's framing story. In many African storytelling traditions, water is both destructive and life-giving. It cannot be reduced to either purely negative or positive symbolism. It takes and it gives. It destroys old things and makes new things possible. The flood that takes Mufasa's biological family is also the flood that sets him on the path toward his destiny. The water that destroys also creates. This is the circle of life in its most elemental, natural form, not as a comfortable affirmation, but as an honest reckoning with the fact that everything costs something. Every new beginning is built on the bones of an ending. The storm in the framing story, the storm under which Rafiki tells Kiara her grandfather's legend, is not incidental. It is the film saying, this story is a flood. It will take things from you. And it will give you something in return. Part 6, Technical and Artistic Review. The animation and visual language. The photorealistic animation style pioneered in the 2019 Lion King remake is retained and, in many ways, significantly improved here. The criticism leveled at the 2019 film, that the photorealistic approach drained the characters of expressiveness, that it was hard to read the emotion in the lions' faces, is addressed in Mufasa through what I can only describe as a more theatrical approach to lighting and composition that compensates for the animals' naturalistic facial range. Jenkins and his team find ways to communicate emotion through body language, through posture, through the quality of light on a character's face, in ways that are genuinely inventive. You know what these lions are feeling even when you couldn't articulate exactly how the image is conveying it. That's skilled visual storytelling. The African landscape is rendered with extraordinary beauty. The savanna, the forests, the waterfalls, the grasslands at dawn. These are not generic backgrounds. They are specific, textured, alive in the way that the best natural cinematography is alive. Barry Jenkins's direction. If there's one thing to say about Jenkins's directorial imprint on this film, it's this: he insisted on slowing down. The 2019 remake was, in places, a film that seemed almost anxious about its own emotional content, rushing through moments that deserved to breathe. treating tragedy with efficiency rather than care. Jenkins does the opposite. He holds on faces. He lets silence do work. He trusts the audience to sit with discomfort rather than rushing to resolve it. There are moments in Mufasa, particularly in the second and third acts, where another director would have cut away and moved on. Jenkins doesn't ''t'' he stays. He watches. He lets the emotional reality of the moment fully register before moving forward. This makes the film slower paced than conventional Disney animated features, and I suspect it's part of why the film's critical reception was more mixed than it might otherwise have been. Modern audiences are not always patient with this approach, particularly in family-friendly entertainment. But for those with the attentiveness to match Jenkins's pace, the rewards are enormous. The music, Lin-Manuel Miranda, and the score. Lin-Manuel Miranda contributed original songs to Mufasa, and the results are a fascinating mixed bag. At their best, and the best is genuinely excellent, the songs feel like emotional crystallizations of the film's themes. There is a song in the middle of the film that Mufasa sings about belonging and hope that, if it existed in a different context, would be a certified Disney classic. The melody is irresistible. The lyrics carry genuine emotional weight. And the animation during the sequence is some of the most purely beautiful in the film. At their less successful moments, the songs can feel like they're interrupting the film's emotional rhythm rather than enhancing it, dropping into the story like periodic formal reports rather than organic expressions of character. Hans Zimmer returns to provide the orchestral score, and his work here is among his most nuanced Disney contributions. He builds on the iconic musical motifs of the original Lion King while introducing new themes for Mufasa and Taka that feel like genuine additions to the emotional vocabulary of this world rather than retreads of familiar material. The theme he develops for the Mufasa-Taka friendship is particularly beautiful, a delicate, slightly melancholic melody that seems to contain the full arc of their relationship within its few bars. Sound design. The sound design in Mufasa is extraordinary, and it deserves more attention than it typically gets in reviews of this film. The flood sequence at the beginning is a masterpiece of immersive audio, the roar of the water, the disorienting tumbling chaos, the eerie quiet afterward. If you saw this in a theater with a good sound system, it was visceral in a way that animation rarely achieves. The vocal work in the action sequences, the growls, the roars, the physical sounds of the lion characters, has a grounded, naturalistic quality that keeps reminding you these are real animals even while you're following them through a mythological narrative. Part 7, Critical Review and Comparisons. Strengths. Let me lay out clearly what Mufasa does exceptionally well. First and most importantly, it gives Scar a genuine origin story that doesn't diminish him as a villain but actually deepens him. This is incredibly rare. Most villain origin stories either make the villain too sympathetic, undermining our ability to see them as truly dangerous, or not sympathetic enough, making the origin feel like a formality. Mufasa manages to make Taka/Scar heartbreaking and still frightening, because by the end, you understand exactly how he got there, and understanding doesn't mean forgiving. Second, Barry Jenkins's direction elevates the material consistently. This is not a film that feels like it was directed by committee, like so many modern animated studio films do. It has a genuine point of view, a specific aesthetic sensibility, a clear emotional intention that runs through every scene. Third, the voice performances, particularly from Aaron Pierre and Kelvin Harrison Jr, are outstanding. These are not celebrity stunt castings where the famous name is more significant than the performance. These are actors who found something real in these roles. Fourth, the film's thematic ambition is real and substantive. It is asking genuine questions about belonging, identity, legacy, and the nature of tragedy in ways that hold up to sustained analysis. Weaknesses. The film has real weaknesses, and intellectual honesty requires acknowledging them. The pacing will lose audiences who are used to the tighter rhythmic structure of conventional Disney animated features. The second act in particular has stretches where the deliberate slowing of tempo begins to feel like stagnation rather than intention. For younger viewers especially, this may be a genuine barrier to engagement. Some of the musical numbers don't fully integrate into the film's tonal world. The Lin-Manuel Miranda songs are accomplished, but several of them feel like they belong to a slightly different, more conventionally Broadway-influenced version of this story. When the film is at its most cinematic and its most quiet, the big song sequences can feel like jarring gear shifts. The framing device, while elegant in concept, occasionally creates pacing issues of its own. Returning to Rafiki, Timon, Pumbaa, and Kiara in the present day interrupts the momentum of the main story at moments when that story is building significant emotional velocity. The cuts back to the present can feel like emotional interruptions rather than deepening additions. Kiros, despite Mikkelsen's excellent voice work, gets slightly underdeveloped on the page. We understand his philosophy, but we get only glimpses of his history. For a villain who functions as the film's most explicit embodiment of a set of ideas, a little more depth in his backstory would have strengthened the ideological confrontation at the film's center. Comparisons. How does Mufasa compare to similar films? Against the 1994 Lion King, still, for many audiences, the gold standard, Mufasa fares better than you might expect, precisely because it doesn't try to replicate the 1994 film's specific emotional register. Where the original was operatic and broad, Hamlet in animation, essentially, Mufasa is more intimate and more psychologically specific. These are complementary rather than competing approaches. Against Encanto, 2021, which similarly explored family dynamics, belonging, and the hidden cost of high expectations on individual psychology, Mufasa has comparable thematic ambition but a more uneven execution. Encanto's musical integration is more successful. Mufasa's character work is deeper. Against Turning Red, 2022, which handled adolescent identity and family expectation with remarkable specificity and emotional honesty, Mufasa is broader in scope but comparable in its commitment to psychological realism within a fantastical framework. Against the 2019 Lion King remake, which is its most direct and natural comparison point, Mufasa is not even a contest. The 2019 film was technically stunning and emotionally inert. Mufasa has genuine feeling running through every scene. It's an enormous improvement, and it suggests that the right director makes all the difference. Part 8, Final Verdict and Ending. What Mufasa is really about. Here is what I want you to walk away with, above everything else I've said today. Mufasa, The Lion King is, at its deepest level, a film about a question that every human being on Earth eventually has to answer for themselves. Are you the sum of what you were given, or the sum of what you chose? Mufasa was given nothing. He was swept away from everything he had before he was old enough to understand what he was losing. And what he built from nothing, through 100 small choices, 100 moments of courage when cowardice would have been easier, became a legend. Not because he was destined to be great. But because he chose, repeatedly, to be good. Taka was given everything, bloodline, title, a future already written. And what he built from that abundance, corrupted by pain and resentment and the poison of the wrong voice at the wrong moment, was tragedy. Not because he was destined to fail. But because the choices he made, one by one, accumulated into a version of himself he could not live with. Both trajectories are human. Heartbreakingly, uncomfortably human. Most of us will recognize something of ourselves in both lions, at different points in our lives. The moments when we ran toward danger because someone we loved needed us. And the moments when we let resentment make a choice that our better self would not have made. That is what makes Mufasa genuinely powerful storytelling. Not the animation, not the music, not the mythology. The recognition. The sense that this story is not just about lions in Africa. It is about you. About the gap between who you are and who you could be. About the love that builds things and the pain that, if we're not careful, destroys them. Who is this film for? Mufasa is not a film for very young children in the way that, say, Moana or Encanto are. Its emotional complexity and its deliberately slower pace will challenge the attention of young viewers. Parents taking young children should be prepared for questions about loss, betrayal, and the nature of good and evil that don't have simple, satisfying answers. For older children and teenagers, however, and particularly for teenagers who are navigating questions of identity and belonging and the complicated dynamics of friendship, Mufasa has something real to offer. The Mufasa-Taka relationship is one of the most honest and nuanced depictions of a male friendship in mainstream animation, and it approaches questions about jealousy, inadequacy, and betrayal with a sophistication that most films aimed at this audience never attempt. For adults who love the original Lion King, Mufasa offers a genuine enrichment of the mythology rather than a diminishment. Understanding Scar's origins deepens rather than undermines the tragedy of what he does in the original. You will not watch the original the same way after seeing this. And for anyone interested in Barry Jenkins's work as a filmmaker, Mufasa represents a fascinating evolution. It's not Moonlight. It's not If Beale Street Could Talk. But the same filmmaker who made those films is unmistakably present here, working within constraints and commercial requirements that those films didn't have, and finding, against the odds, a way to make his sensibility felt. Final rating. Alright. Here's where I land. Mufasa, The Lion King is an imperfect film with a genuinely beautiful soul. It is braver than most Disney films of the last decade, smarter than its marketing suggested, and more emotionally resonant than its mixed critical reception would lead you to believe. Its weaknesses are real: the pacing issues, the uneven musical integration, the slightly underdeveloped villain on the page, but they are the weaknesses of a film that was trying something. That was reaching for something. And far more often than not, it gets there. The central friendship between Mufasa and Taka is among the most affecting things Disney has produced in years. Aaron Pierre and Kelvin Harrison Jr. are both exceptional. Barry Jenkins brings a humanity and a visual intelligence to the material that elevates it at every turn. And the film's insistence on treating its audience as emotionally intelligent adults, even within the constraints of a family-friendly franchise product, is something that deserves to be celebrated and supported. I give Mufasa, The Lion King an 8.2 out of 10. It falls short of the absolute top tier. It is not the original 1994 Lion King, and it is not Moonlight, but it is a genuinely good film with moments of authentic greatness. It made me feel things I didn't expect to feel. It made me think about things I carry around with me. And in a cinematic landscape full of sequels and remakes and franchise extensions designed primarily to extract profit from existing nostalgia, finding a film that genuinely cares about what it's saying is something worth acknowledging. A final thought: the circle holds. There's a moment near the very end of Mufasa where young Kiara, having heard the full story of her grandfather's life, having been given the weight and the wonder and the grief of it, looks out at the Pride Lands in the rain and says something quiet. Something simple. Something that any child watching this film will hear and immediately understand, and that any adult watching will hear and feel in a completely different place. She says she's glad Mufasa found his way. And Rafiki, ancient, tired, having carried this story in him for decades, smiles. And says that Mufasa is glad too. And the rain falls. And the story continues. Because that's what stories do. They travel. They move from one set of hands to another, from one generation to the next, carrying the weight of what happened and the hope of what might happen, connecting us to people we never met and places we've never been and truths that don't change no matter how much everything else does. Mufasa, The Lion King is the kind of story. Imperfect. Beautiful. Worth the time. Go watch it. Or watch it again. And this time, pay attention to Taka. Pay attention to the light. I'll see you in the next one.
Your betrayal ends here. You are weak, Mufasa. I am the king! Not for long.